Okie dokie, we're going on to the next scientific principle of crime investigation. Yes, this is actually one of my favorites because it seems to be the most tangible. Okay, something that we tend to look at a lot when it comes to solving a crime, which is, yes, the crime scene. Okay, you're going to deal a lot with the crime scene because you have a great assignment coming up where you're going to kind of construct your own crime scene, but obviously that plays a huge role in solving the crime because you need to know all the details of the crime scene. So let's go into some details. So the first thing that I just want to share with you guys is that the area of the crime scene is determined by the investigator, kind of the investigator second. I'll talk about the first responders and what they do, but they're going to initially kind of determine that perimeter of the crime scene, which is actually a really important thing, okay? Because think about it. What has happened in the crime scene, sometimes that perimeter might change a little bit depending on talking to witnesses, finding more evidence, and so forth. So that perimeter is kind of a big deal because you need to absolutely make sure that you talk and observe and do everything possible to know that perimeter of that crime scene in and out so you know what's going on. Okay, so that's kind of the one first major thing, is just that perimeter, setting the perimeter. Okay, but a primary crime scene, or the primary crime scene, is a place where the crime was first committed. I can't talk tonight. Hello. The secondary crime scene exists if there's another location related to it. So just think about that basically you can have a primary crime scene where, you know, you find maybe a victim's body, you find evidence. But then a secondary crime scene, maybe that, maybe the criminal had moved to something else, some other place, and caused some other kind of ruckus of some sort. That can still be considered a secondary crime scene. So there can be more than one crime scene for one crime, but obviously, you know, the investigators will kind of, you know, make sure that it's specific to, you know, what actually is happening at that crime that they're trying to solve. Okay, so primary versus secondary crime scenes. Now we also have what we call a macroscopic crime scene. Okay, macroscopic. Macro means big. So the macroscopic crime scene is going to consist of many crime scenes. Oftentimes it includes the surrounding areas to the actual place where the crime took place. So the macroscopic can actually encompass more than one crime scene. It can, and I don't want to say like different crimes, but hopefully you guys understand that when I say consists of many crime scenes, meaning many kind of scenes within that one particular crime. So a macroscopic crime scene could be an entire house. It could be actually an entire building, or and the surroundings around that. But when we talk about the microscopic, teeny tiny, we're actually talking about maybe where you found the victim, the immediate area surrounding most of the evidence. Okay, so typically surrounding the body. That would be the macroscopic. So here's a good look at, you know, someone kind of probably taking a look at the microscopic scene right here of the crime scene versus, if I go back just a little bit, let's go back to this picture right here. This is kind of tying off more of a macroscopic crime scene. Okay, so let's keep going. Sorry, I'll move past this. The microscopic. Yes, there we go. All right. Now, I told you guys I was going to go into the first responders. Who first kind of gets to a crime scene? What do they do? What are the roles? Okay, there's a lot to that. So let's talk a little bit about these lovely first responders. Okay, they happen to be mostly police officers. Sometimes fire department will arrive just before or just after the police officer. But basically, the police officer arriving at the scene is the first responder, the first person on the scene, first responder. Lovely, isn't that such a great concept? So the first responders' primary responsibilities are to render medical assistance. So if there's a victim lying there that's still alive, obviously call for extra help, but start to render that medical assistance if necessary. Catch a perpetrator if he's still at the crime scene, he or she, could be a girl. And secure the crime scene to preserve the evidence, okay? So you'll see that the police are basically going to be doing, oops, sorry, I didn't want to do that. Okay, I want to go in closer there. So your police will end up first. They will put up tape right away to preserve that crime scene, but obviously if there's a victim there or if there is the perpetrator there, those are the first two things they're going to do. They're going to tend to the victim, get the perpetrator, okay? Call for help too. That's obviously a big thing, which I'm going to talk about right now. So again, the first responder, obviously if it's 1 to 2 to 3 people, still there are so many other people that need to be on scene doing different things. So they're going to call in for specialized people for further investigation. Also, further medical assistance might be needed. So it just depends on what they find at the crime scene, okay? So, such like this, you know, good old Luke Skywalker, if that's who that is going to call in for backup when the stormtroopers come in. No, just kidding. Yeah. All right, so moving on here. The next thing that an officer might do would be to question witnesses surrounding that crime scene. So, obviously, the police officers have huge roles. You know, the first responders have a lot to do. But then they're going to call in for backup, and they're going to call for the people that have a lot of answers to some of these things that are going on, okay? Some of those forensic scientists, the criminologists, and so forth. Okay, now I'm going to go through a big old list of these people right now. Yes. So more peeps that show up. Sorry, I'm a teacher, but I still use that lingo because I like to. Okay, so some of the people that might show up we already talked about. Let me kind of zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see this. So police officers, first responders, we talked about that. They secure the area, protect the evidence. Detectives, who are members of the police force, will typically be the people to interview the witnesses and interact with the investigators. So my dad, being a retired cop, he actually made it to detective before he retired, so it's kind of cool. So he would be one of those people that not only would be possibly a first responder, but he would then take over interviewing witnesses, interact with some of those investigators, communicating some of the things that have been found as kind of a first responder. Paramedics are going to render assistance to those injured, so if there are still injured victims that are not pronounced dead at the scene, then basically paramedics are going to be there to try and help those people. District attorneys might show up. Let's kind of move this over so you guys can see. District attorneys determine whether a search warrant, legal documents that authorize search and investigation is needed. Okay, so if there's a search warrant that's needed right away, you're going to have a district attorney kind of show up, which is kind of interesting, you know, knowing that that's one of the people that might show up at the crime scene right away. Medical examiners or coroners, okay, those are going to perform the initial examination to determine cause and time of death. And we'll read more about that in the next couple lessons. You'll notice you'll get kind of a better picture of what a coroner or a medical examiner does. But ultimately, they are going to determine the cause. Kind of, you know, they can't do anything without an autopsy and stuff like that, but kind of try to figure out a basic cause of death and a time of death, okay, for a homicide. You'll have crime scene investigators that show up that document the area, search for evidence. And then the last people that might show up might be the special forensic scientists, okay? Such as forensic entomologists who study insects to determine time of death, may be called in when necessary, okay? So it depends on the crime scene who's going to be called in and when. So hopefully that kind of gives you guys a little bit more about who's going to be on a crime scene and what they do, okay? All right, some final details and then I will be done. So first responders must render aid and notify others. Here's just kind of wrapping up, okay? So the first responders could be mostly the police officers, some investigators, but mostly police officers and detectives, okay? They must render aid, notify others, okay, call for backup, such as the criminal investigators, and then determine the perimeter of the scene, okay? I always hit the wrong button. So next, the police officers will briefly investigate the scene, secure it from unauthorized personnel, so they'll probably tape it off, make sure that some people are kind of standing guard, making sure that no one's coming into this crime scene that would possibly taint that area, okay? That's a step that's necessary to preserve evidence, okay, as right there. If you don't preserve evidence, well then, obviously your case can't hold up and it's really hard to convict anybody of anything, okay, of any crime, which is always very disappointing, especially if you have anything to do with the victim, okay? All right, and then investigators will scan the scene, determine the photos that need to be taken, search for evidence. I want you guys to know that once investigators come, remember the police officers originally kind of set up a perimeter, but the investigators are the people that can actually set that perimeter and say this is for sure what's the perimeter. They can change the perimeter, they can widen it, they can narrow it down. So investigators kind of have the end-all say of like what the perimeter is, what kind of photos should be taken, and what are the evidence that kind of shows up. So evidence will then be documented and properly handled. You'll notice there's a part in this particular section that really talks about the evidence. It needs to be bagged, numbered. There's a chain of command that the evidence goes through. So it's really important that evidence is preserved, because obviously that's what leads to solving crimes and convictions, okay? So the evidence, please read through that information pretty carefully, because that's very important. All right, from all this, the goal is to reconstruct the crime scene. Because if you reconstruct the crime scene, you can kind of hypothesize what happened during it, why, who, and when, where, all that good stuff. So reconstructing the crime scene is one of the huge goals that all of these people involved in this crime scene investigation, that's kind of one of their main goals, is to reconstruct the crime scene and kind of figure out the hows, the whys, the whens. Okay? All right. I'm almost done. Let's sum things up with a lovely video. This video is a little bit dry, but nonetheless, it kind of gives you guys some good information on kind of the first responders and such. So here we go.
The death scene is one of the most important scenes a police officer or investigator will respond to. Although death may appear to have resulted from natural causes, it is important to treat every scene as a crime scene, because it may well be. There must be rapid response by the team investigating the death scene. This team includes the patrol officer, detectives, crime scene investigators, and the representative from the appropriate medical examiner's office. Rapid response is critical to protect evidentiary materials before they are altered, destroyed, or lost. Rapid response also allows investigators to obtain, evaluate, and record statements from witnesses and potential suspects before they leave the death scene. The testimony obtained from these individuals is considered evidence. Anything and everything must be considered as physical evidence. In the forensic investigation of death, physical evidence is very important. Properly determining the manner of the death and solving the homicide, if there is one, often hinges on this physical evidence. Therefore, it is the investigator's responsibility to make sure that this physical evidence is not lost or altered.
Amazing, right? No, actually there's some great information in there. I don't know, kind of a weird looking hand, if you ask me. Didn't look pretty real to me. But anyways, it gives you guys an idea of how important the first responders are on a crime scene. So let's not take that lightly, even though I like to make jokes all the time. The crime scene is very important. So make sure you guys read through, take notes on that section, and you will be using a lot of that information in your assignment. Okay, all right. See ya next time.